more time. Hello, everybody. It's Anxiety. I am on tonight with Stephen Schueller of Psyberguide.org, which is a website that helps you identify good mental health apps and kind of throw away the untrustworthy ones. So I'm very excited to have him on, as you guys could tell, but not that I'm never not excited. But Stephen, do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a clinical psychologist by my training. I got my PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Pennsylvania in Philly, and then did a clinical internship at the University of California, San Francisco. I was a professor actually for a couple of years at Northwestern University in Chicago, and then recently came over to UC Irvine just in last July. So a lot of my research looks at trying to understand how mental health services can be made more accessible and available through technologies, and trying to understand how technologies are contributing to mental health benefits. I've also been trained as a cognitive behavioral therapist, which is an
Oh.
evidence-based practice for the treatment of a variety of different mental health issues. Most of the treatment have done has been in the context of depression and anxiety. I worked for when I was in San Francisco. I was in at San Francisco General Hospital and worked in the integrated behavioral health program there. So I've done treatment and research and teaching and all sorts of different things related to trying to better understand how to provide mental health services.
That's amazing. So what made you get into all of that?
Yeah, I have I'm not one of those people who says that I always knew what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Oh, that's good. We like those people because we can relate to them better.
Maybe I did, but it wasn't a psychologist. I actually started out as a structural engineering major when
Oh
I
my
was
goodness.
in
Okay.
college, and had all these classes on building bridges that I found boring. So I was taking a psychology class, and I was like, "Wow, people are so much more interesting than bridges," and just kind of continued along the track of doing work in that space. And so did my undergraduate at UC Riverside, actually. So I've done a lot of training in the University of California system, and was studying happiness and happiness research with Sonia Lyubomirsky, who does work in positive psychology, and just really was really interested in it, and started to do about 10 years ago when we were doing boring things like building websites to try to help people with happiness interventions and depression. Not that helping people with happiness and depression was boring, but the websites we built were really boring. We were putting
Yeah.
like PDFs on websites.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
we've gone a lot. We've advanced a lot from there, where we were kind of 10 years ago doing that sort of stuff. So now it's more sort of interactive stuff, mobile apps, and trying to figure out different ways in which we can use sort of information gained from technology to think about mental health.
And there's a lot of that out there, and from what I understand, there's quite a bit of junk. Like as far as I knew, there were 4 apps for mental health, and then I found
Yeah.
CyberGuide, so actually Martha found me, CyberGuide found me, and I started looking into it, and apparently there's a bunch of apps, and a bunch of them are junk. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's probably like 10 to 20,000. And I usually say that I think probably 90 to 95% of those are junk, which, depending on how you look at it, like the optimist in me says, like, well, that means there's maybe 500 to 1,000 good things out
Right.
there, which is not so bad because that's probably 900 more than we need. But the problem is that means that there's 9,000 ish out there that are junk.
So what
And,
qualifies for junk?
so I think there's a couple different things that qualify for junk. And I'll also say that I'm not, I think a lot of folks in my field have this idea that if things haven't been scientifically evaluated, that means that there's no way that they're good. And I have an open mind. I think that there's a lot of things that have been scientifically evaluated that are probably not all that useful for people,
Sure.
and things that have not been scientifically evaluated yet, but that if we actually did scientifically evaluate would probably be useful.
Mm-hmm.
But I think ones that I would consider junk are things that have content in there that are potentially harmful for folks. So there's
Okay.
one we talk about fairly often that fortunately isn't around anymore, but gets talked about in like the research literature a lot, which is a bipolar app, an app for individuals with bipolar disorder that one of the suggestions was during a manic episode, you should sort of write it out by taking a shot of hard alcohol. I mean, this is not a good idea. And so it's like apps like that that have sort of content that is not useful and potentially harmful. I think those are junky apps. I think apps that charge a lot of money but don't
Sure.
provide any sort of benefit to the person using it, apps that take advantage of people through what they're charging, I think those are junky
Sure.
apps.
Yeah.
Apps that are very clunky or hard to use.
Oh, we lost you for a second. Okay. Clunky or hard to use. Sorry.
That aren't updated very often. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that there are some apps that get put up on the App Store and the developer kind of forgets about it. And
Oh.
so it's not updated.
Right.
And so I think that's another thing that we look at in terms of how frequently is an app updated. Are the developers actually kind of giving that app the love and care it needs to keep it working and keep it up to date? So those are just some of the things we look at when we're trying to think about separating the good stuff from the bad stuff.
And I have to ask, because I know these are probably the most prominent ones that people talk about, but like stuff like BetterHelp and Talkspace, do you have feelings on those?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are definitely benefits to getting people to connect with other people through digital platforms. So I think like an app like Seven Cups is a really interesting one because it reduces the barrier to get someone to be able to connect with another person and provides someone some brief training to be able to connect and support with a person. So you have, like on Seven Cups, for example, these listeners who have undergone like a very little bit of training.
Mm-hmm.
And that little bit of training is helpful to provide some emotional support, and it allows you to connect with someone and chat to someone and get support in ways that wouldn't be sort of possible maybe through non-digital platforms. And so I think there are, like I said, there are some good, interesting ones out there, and I think that's one of the things we do at CyberGuide is try to identify the things that might be helpful for folks.
Right, focusing on those instead of so just filtering out all the kind of really, I mean, as much as we can call it noise, it's junk. It is just a bunch of noise too, right? Because there's always going. I mean, when it comes to like mental health, like even blogging and all that stuff, there's a lot of noise out there, and picking out stuff that's decent and of decent quality is always tough. So, what are some of the qualifications that make an app good?
Yeah, well, and also say, I don't think this is unique to the digital space. This is also true in traditional mental health services. There's a lot of therapists and clinicians out there who aren't all that great and aren't all that helpful.
Yeah.
I know.
We've met some of them. We've talked and met with some of them.
So I think a little bit of it is the same qualities we would look for in a mental health provider, we'd also want to look for in an app. That you feel comfortable sharing and connecting with this thing. Something we hear from a lot of people is that the images and the colors make a big difference, which I think makes good sense. I think another thing I often kind of say when thinking about these tools is like there's no one app that rules them all. There's not an app that's going to take care of everybody.
Sure.
So I think that's why some diversity is useful because it helps people connect to the things that connect with them. So definitely downloading and using and trying things I think are really sort of useful. I think things that we look for is that it's been developed by a team that has expertise, including both kind of clinical expertise, that they know something about what helps people for whatever target issue or support that they're dealing with, that they have a technical team that are able to produce something that works sort of free of bugs and is visually and engaging. We look at what the user experience is like. So is it easy to learn and easy to use? I think another thing that we look at is trying to think about how sort of flexible the app is to be customizable and usable by people to kind of meet their needs. Because one of the things that we've heard a lot from people when they've used these apps is that they are very sort of clunky or fixed in the way that they do things. And so it doesn't really meet the needs of the person using it. And so we really want to think about apps that are broad enough and flexible enough that they can be used for multiple people with multiple different sort of requirements and needs kind of going with those apps. So those are some of the things that we look at. I think, one thing that I kind of talked a little bit about earlier was just how often or how recently these things have been updated. And there was actually a recent scientific study that came out that found that one of the best predictors of the effectiveness of apps was just looking at how recently it was updated. So apps that were more recently updated were producing better benefits for people, which I think is really sort of interesting. So I think there's a couple sort of just easy things that people can look at when they're browsing the App Store to figure out if this is an app that would be useful for them. How many people download it? What are the average star ratings? How recently was it updated? Can do a little bit of looking into the credentials of the people who developed it, but I'll admit that's often hard. I mean, that's something that we do at CyberGuide, and it's probably one of the things that's most discussed upon our team because we have this category of like clinical expertise. And so we often have raters come back to us and say like, well, this person has this YouTube video that they posted and they're from this organization, and is that clinical expertise? And so we really have to dig into that. And I mean, sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. And, you know, we have to kind of delve a little bit more to sort of understand those things and figure them out.
Got it. But that all sounds wow. So the other thing you touched upon how you know, certain apps just don't do what the person needs them to do. So I'm assuming like accessibility is one of those things, but also you know, certain conditions maybe will not be as conducive to help through an app as others. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that because actually, you know, there's a lot of research in this area going on. And really what we've found is that, you know, practically anything you can treat through a traditional face-to-face treatment, you can treat through a digital tool. So there's tools for individuals with schizophrenia and psychosis. There's tools for individuals with bipolar. There's tools for individuals dealing with substance use, for depression, for anxiety, for a host of different things. Those, you know, tools might have different considerations, especially in like the accessibility sort of aspect in that you're talking about. But, you know, there really are tools that deal with sort of a multitude of different aspects. I think actually one thing that's sort of interesting with these tools is that they fit into sort of different places. And so, you know, an app is not going to do everything. Technology is not a panacea. It can like support some of the different aspects that you're focusing on. But, you know, it might be people with a variety of different things might be able to use a mindfulness app, something like Headspace or Calm, that's going to be able to provide some content that might be helpful for them. Meditations, breathing exercises. Calm's nice in that it has a lot of these different tracks, as does Headspace, that are focused on kind of different sort of target areas. And so, you know, even for people facing different issues, it might be that there's a component of one of these apps that's sort of helpful for them. So one of the things we actually kind of promote at CyberGuide, and again, this is a little bit of like, there's no one app to help everyone. It's also possible that people might be able to find sort of a couple different apps that might be able to meet their needs. And so we often talk about kind of creating these app toolkits that might be your kind of coping toolkit that lives on your phone that might help you through different sort of challenges or struggles that you're dealing with.
Yeah, imagine that comes up a lot as you're looking through all these apps and being like, there isn't an app for this. Why doesn't somebody make an app for this or that? Why do you think that? Do you believe that we're on like a big precipice of mental health and technology, or do you think we're already kind of there and just trying to have the technology catch up? Like, why is it so important that mental health and technology converge right now and we have these tools right now?
I think we are on a precipice, and I think it hasn't really caught up. I think on the industry side, we're seeing a lot of interest in development in new tools for mental and behavioral health. And so I think it's sort of a burgeoning area. I mean, I think some of the reasons that I'm really excited about it is that there's just not enough mental health supports out there. You know, I'm a clinical psychologist, and there's 1/3 of the counties in the US don't have a single licensed clinical psychologist. It's hard to get care if you need it, and it's hard to get good care. And so I think that's some of the ways in which we're thinking about trying to use technology as ways to improve mental health services. I think another thing, you know, I mentioned earlier that technology faces some of the same problems as clinicians in that they're not all good. So we know in terms of when people even overcome all the barriers to see a mental health professional, the modal number of visits is one. And so we're not doing a good job as mental health professionals providing services that people like and want and sort of resonate with them. And so I think technology offers a potential to maybe give people more of what they're looking for or what they want if we thoughtfully design technologies to meet the needs of people. And so I think a little of it is also just giving, different things for different people who might want to sort of seek mental health supports in different ways. So I think there's a lot that could be done. Not that we're there, but I think it really requires sort of thoughtfully creating communities. Kind of like the community you're creating that, really helps provide support for people in different ways.
Got it. And I've often heard, and you kind of mentioned this research before, and people who kind of turn their nose at things that doesn't have research behind it. But do you feel, and I've heard this before, that technology is not enough? Going on an app is not the same as meeting somebody in person. And I know you kind of touched upon this, but the research that I have read kind of goes in that direction, that like it should be used, technology basically should be used as a gateway and not as the solution. What do you think about that?
I think that there's a lot of research that supports that, like peer support, for example,
Right.
is sufficient and really useful. And so technology can be a really useful way to provide peer support. And for some people, that might be enough. I think the way that I think about it is that for some people, there's going to be a variety of different tools that are going to work for them. So it could be a friend, it could be finding the right activity, it could be a digital tool, it could be a peer support group, it could be a variety of different things. For some people, they're going to need more specific tools. It might be treatment, it might be medication, it might be some other forms of alternative treatments. And for some people, it's going to take some trial and error to find what those things are. And so I think technology is something that's going to be a piece of the quilt of mental health services that are going to meet the needs of different people. It just happens to be the sort of patch on the quilt that I'm really interested in.
Right.
I can't be an expert in everything, so I have to pick sort of a place to focus on. So for some people, maybe it will be enough, and for other people's, no. But it's going to take a little bit of, I think, work on our side as researchers and developers to understand, who are the people who need sort of which pieces.
Got it. That's fascinating. That whole part, this whole idea that like we can help people by bringing them to technology or through technology. Like I was just reading an article about the fact that the best thing about a lot of like health apps in general is that they help doctors in that in between period of, hey, I haven't seen a doctor in 3 months. I don't remember what my sleeping habits were in that time. I don't remember how many days like I walked versus was sitting. And I have this app that I can just show my doctor the data. And I actually I have an app called Dailyo, and I promote the bejesus out of it. They don't sponsor me, but I love them. And I use that app. So I go to a cognitive behavioral therapist, and I'm in a space where I only need to see her like once a month. And I use that app as a bridge, like a bridge in between. When she saw me last, what would happen is that she would ask, how are you feeling last month or last week? And I'd be like, it wasn't a good week. And that would really be informed by maybe I had a, bad 2 days, but it doesn't mean the whole week was bad. And so she's the one who encouraged me. She's like, write it down. And then I found this app and I was like, well, I don't need to write anything down. Here's data and it's colorful. And you can literally look back and say, no, you know what? You actually did have a decent week, you had a decent month, but you're thinking about it so it helped. First of all, it helped pinpoint an area of treatment that I clearly needed, but second of all, it helped her do her job in a more informed way, which I don't know, I think that's cool.
Yeah, I think another thing I hear from a lot of practitioners is that it's really helpful to kind of spread apart the learning that people are doing, because I think a lot of times I hear clinicians talk about, some clients come in and it's like they didn't do their homework, so they're doing it right there in the session. And that's good, but it's probably better if you do it kind of spread out throughout the week and throughout your month. And I'll admit, I remember when I used to take music lessons, I was always the kid who would practice my piece just the day before I see my saxophone teacher.
Sure.
And then I was not a very good musician, I'll admit it. When I should have been kind of practicing, throughout
Of course.
the week, because that's how we build skills. And so I think another piece of these digital tools is they can help provide better sort of reminders or nudges to more routinely practice some of the skills that we're working on, that can also then reinforce the learning in better ways.
Got it. And Kit Carbon asks a good question that's usually the next follow-up, and usually what like all of these articles really hone in on is privacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much of my privacy do I want to give up in order to have this convenience? And is that something that you guys rate too? And how do you feel about that in general?
Yeah, so we rate on CyberGuide, we evaluate apps based on transparency around data security and privacy. And so what we mean by that is we review the privacy and data security policies, and we look for their sufficiency in terms of describing what they're doing, and then also if they hit sort of standards around data sharing and data security and privacy issues. I will say we did a recent review of depression apps where we reviewed about 120 apps that are specified for depression.
I didn't know there was that many. Oh my.
And about half of those didn't even have a privacy policy. So it's like you have no idea what they're doing with your data.
Wow.
And of the half that actually had privacy policies, about half of those had privacy policies that we deemed as unacceptable based on our rating scale. So it goes to show that the data security and privacy of these apps are, on the whole, pretty awful. I mean, I do think that there are a variety of apps that are taking your data and storing your information, and you have no idea what you're doing about it. Actually, the Department of Defense and the VA have developed a lot of apps. I mean, probably like 30 or 40 for a variety of different issues. And I will say, I love the Department of Defense folks and I love the VA folks, and they've done really great stuff. It's a little challenging sometimes because they are developed for military and veteran personnel. And so sometimes the culture stuff doesn't translate or the imagery doesn't sort of resonate, but they are great apps. And a great thing about them is also they have super high standards of data security and privacy. None of the information leaves the apps. That's actually something that's required by the DoD and the VA. So you don't have to worry so much about, is this commercial company storing my data or taking my data.
But the government has it. I don't know how much better that is, right?
No, but it doesn't leave the apps. And so the government does not have it. And the other thing is also on a lot of their apps, they have PIN codes or passwords that protect the app themselves. So if someone got your phone and opened it up and looked at those apps, they wouldn't be able to actually get into that app and get any of your information. So yeah, I mean, it's a concern, and some apps take it seriously and some app companies don't take it seriously. So it's something we review at Psyberguide, and we try to provide information. I mean, we also sort of encourage people to read the privacy and security policies, but we also know that those things are written at reading level. I mean, we spend hours reviewing them for our data review procedures, and so I know it's hard to do.
Yeah, that's not exact. I mean, it's the part that you skip when you load an app usually. I mean, unless it is your privacy stuff. Guys, pay attention. Don't just download stuff. It's like the Apple, right? Privacy and stuff. You just skip it. Nobody reads that. You don't. That it's for skipping through. But I mean, I appreciate there's people like you who can kind of do a little bit of that legwork and let me know. But at the same time, I don't know. I'm one of those people that's also like, I know I have a smartphone. I know it's listening to me all the time. I don't have misconception over, how much of my information is already out there anyway. So, yeah. What do you think that? So this going along with this Big Brother concept, do you think that there is something like inherently scary about people knowing our mental health, more scary than our other health apps?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a fellow I really liked. I cannot remember his name, so I'm just going to steal his quote, but talked about this idea of this, the freaky line, which the freaky line is like that line in technology where we find things sort of acceptable to do or not acceptable to do. And that the further we kind of go down this, this pathway, that freaky line keeps getting moved because technology is able to do kind of cool stuff for us, but we do a trade-off because it gets a little freaky. So for example, I love to use Google Maps, and it helps me not get lost when I go new places. But it is a little creepy that when I start driving places, when I start driving to work, my phone says, "Hey, it's going to take you 8 minutes to drive to work," and I don't tell it I'm driving to work.
Right.
Like, ooh, how did you know that? And you know where I am, and you know where I work, and
Yeah.
this is a little creepy, Google.
My
it has
husband's
some
car
utility.
told us the other day, asked us if we were going to ShopRite because we were like driving. It was like, oh, if you go to ShopRite, it's only 2 minutes from here. And we're like, oh, exactly like that.
Or when I'm texting people now, when I text certain people, it knows the words I usually text that people, and it gives me some suggestions about things I should say, and they're usually pretty good. It's like, oh, that's cool. You know what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I do have some concerns about this. I think definitely insofar as, as we start to rely on technology to do some of these things, it might sort of restrict the ways we kind of communicate and relate to people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it sort of it eats away at the sort of creativity, I think, of the human being and the human condition.
Well, sure, you're only getting half of the the word is escaping me. Hormones? Is the word hormone? It's not hormones, you guys. I'm embarrassing myself. But you're only getting half of like all the happy stuff bouncing around in your brain, because you're not getting that oxytocin from like hugging and touching somebody and being next to them and looking them right in the eye. But you're still getting all that nice dopamine high from like getting likes and kind of talking to people and having them give compliments to you without seeing you face to face. It's a weird thing, and we talk about it a lot here when I do know what the word I'm looking for is.
Endorphins.
Endorphins, thank you. But yeah, I that kind of, I don't know. So do you feel like that's missing from society now, generally?
I mean, I think sometimes yes, sometimes no. And, I think that probably we don't want to move all of our social interactions online, but by the same token, we're able to connect with people in ways that we never would have been able to without technology, and find people who can really, understand us and connect with us in ways that was hard to do before we had sort of this digital world and this digital space. So, I think the thing that we talk a lot about at CyberGuide is that this is not like an all good or all bad thing, that there's ways that technology and digital platforms are useful. There's ways in which it's not useful and helpful. And you just have to sort of think about, what is it giving you and what is it taking away, and try to do more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff. And sometimes that's hard, because sometimes the bad stuff is also a little bit fun. But
yeah, you don't have like a clear-cut villain, darn it. Like, it's not like Terminator, where you're like, oh, Skynet, and you could shake your fist and, and literally fight evil, like fight this representation of it. It's not like that. I don't think the singularity is going to be like that either. But that's just my conspiracy theory, you guys. Thank you so much, Twinkie Talks, for coming in and bringing your folks in. I appreciate you. You are not lost. I just, obviously, we're during an interview, didn't want to interrupt anybody during this. I'm really into this discussion, because now we got into Big Brother territory, and that gets into conspiracy theory territory. So it's back to psychology from there. I swear. So where is that link? Like, where is CyberGuide then going to help maybe mediate some of that? Just obviously the simple answer is, well, we're giving you information so you don't download the app that tells you to drink when you're experiencing a manic episode.
Yeah, I think we also try to put a lot of content on our site through having different guest bloggers or other resources that kind of talk about, including him here. Wrote a blog post recently on Twitch that kind of bring up some of these issues. And so, beyond just, the core thing that we do is we identify and review apps. And so we have this app guide on our website that's kind of like our core offering, but we also have that are also on our website that kind of talk about sort of more broadly these issues with, digital health and how that intersects with just our use of technology more generally. And so I think that part of being a thoughtful user of technology for mental health purposes is also just knowing a little bit more about technology and how to sort of moderate and use it in different ways. Knowing what, data people are getting about you in different sources, and trying to think about, is that okay? I know it's hard to be educated, but it definitely helps, being educated as much as possible around these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially if there's something out there that is helping. And guys, this is not an advertisement. Stephen is here on his own volition. I am here. Nobody's getting paid. It's a nonprofit. Nobody's getting paid. But generally, like, I love the tool, and I'm very excited that it's out there and it's available to folks. You guys put in so much work to kind of do that leg work. When you guys contacted me and I found out that such a thing existed, I kind of had a sigh of relief a little bit, because that's exactly what I've been worried about, is that I've seen apps, maybe maybe they don't necessarily have like the worst intentions, but I have seen apps that just I've seen, bad privacy policies and just bad advice or like very generic advice that it's very clear that it's only there because they're going to get 99 cents from your download.
Right.
And so just, it's the same way I feel about, like, there's bloggers out there who give all of us mental health bloggers a bad name, who will, tell you, here's 5 steps to sleeping better and stuff like that. So I'm really, really happy that you guys are around and you guys are there to do some of the legwork. I think that's awesome. So do you guys, if there's any questions in the audience, now is the time to ask. Again, Stephen Schueller is here from Psyberguide, which is a website that filters all of the mental health apps available, and mental health, should I just say technology?
We do more stuff than just apps. I think I use apps so often because that's where the
most of the user
of the space is. Yeah, but there are also, there's like one of these interesting non-app technologies is this headband called Muse. I don't know if you've seen this before. It's a headband you use while meditating and kind of can read some signals to help in and do this focus on your meditation. So there's other things like that, wearable devices that are becoming slightly more popular, but still the big chunk of the market is these mental health apps.
Got it. Yeah, so you guys, so that's what Stephen Schueller focuses on and Cyberguide focuses on. So ask your questions right now. Now is the right time to ask. Tiger's Spine, thank you so much for the host. Nathan, thank you so much for the subscription. Twinkie Talks, again, for that raid. I can't thank you enough. I appreciate you. Blissful Splick, thank you for asking your question. It is now ready to be answered. Have you heard about the mental health game from New Zealand? It's region locked, but it's targeted to teens, and I think it's CBT based. Oh, there are like video games now out there.
Yeah, there's this app or mental health game in New Zealand that they created. It's called Sparks, and so it's like a role-playing game that has cognitive behavioral therapy concepts built into the game, and they've done some research studies that show that it works. They've also done some really interesting things in terms of tailoring it for different audiences. So specifically, there's a version of Sparks called Rainbow Sparks that is for LGBTQ individuals. And so, yeah, it's pretty cool. But again, it's sort of region locked. So I think, that's some of the challenges with some of these things is that they, there are some tools that are available only through, one of the big markets for these tools is like direct to businesses. So some corporations have relationships with companies that provide these tools. If you work for a company, maybe it's worth sort of asking about. It's been interesting. I've talked to some people where I've been like, oh yeah, I've heard your company subscribes to, this platform. And they're like, I had no idea that was a benefit available to me. That sounds awesome. I would check it out.
Yeah.
So if someone's going to give you something for free, you might as well use it, right? Or try it. So yeah, I think there are some cool instances that people are trying to figure out sort of ways to use technology in ways that don't feel as like utilitarian as some of the apps that are out here.
So I'm going to ask you to be a little bit gossipy. If you have any information, are there any apps that are super popular that you're like, this really makes me uncomfortable. This shouldn't be as popular as it is, that you're willing to talk about?
Oh man, super popular apps. I feel like a lot of the super popular apps that I know of have some good sort of pieces to them. Okay. I will say I like all the folks at Headspace. I like Headspace. I cannot deal with the British accents, so I can't. It's not all that helpful for me.
Not relaxing at all, then.
No, it's not good for me. But it's they have a whole ton of. I love the videos, and so I use the videos all the time for some different instances of demonstrating some things to folks.
By the way, you guys, if you pass the there's this group. shoot, if you pass a test, and I will give you this information later because I can't remember it right now, but if you pass a test to be the no stigmas guide, if you pass their exam to being like a no stigmas ambassador, you get 1 year of Headspace for free, by the way. So that's a way to get it, and at least try it, give it a shot.
Yeah, and see if you like British accents.
There you go. Not really about tech, but do you have any tips regarding how to respond to daily triggers before they lead to a tailspin? Do you
Yeah,
want
I mean,
yeah, do
so
you mind?
I'll give a little bit of a tech sort of answer first to bend everything to my interest, and then I'll answer it
Sure.
anyway. But I mean, I do think these are one of those places where using something like a mood tracking app like Dailyo that you mentioned, Em, is a sort of useful tool because it can help you sort of identify those daily triggers and understand them. And so I definitely think understanding is a good sort of initial piece. And I do think that using an app-based tool sometimes can help give you a little bit more perspective, because writing something down and putting it in an app form kind of helps you step away from it a little bit. So I think that's one aspect, and it helps you kind of stay on top of things. So I think that some of the aspects of the tailspin is that we often, the time where it sort of really enters our own sort of awareness or thoughts is where we've kind of already gone from the sort of initial danger, but like still safe, to like the, ooh man, now we're really activated. This is getting really bad. And so sometimes just using a tool like an app can help us deal with those daily triggers. I think that, outside of technology, I think one thing that I'll just say is I think routines are very important for folks. And so if there are daily triggers that you'll see on a daily basis, thinking about ways to either build in recovery time for yourself through routines, like what is the self-care that you need to do to make sure that you can recover from the exposure of that daily trigger. And if there are things that maybe are a little more sporadic or maybe don't occur on a daily basis, but are sort of small triggers, thinking about ways you can build a routine that helps you sort of avoid those things. So if it's, a certain coworker or an interaction that you do on a regular basis, maybe you have to make sure that you have some time before you go into the work setting and deal with that coworker to do something that's self-care, that's going to help you stay focused, reading, exercise, whatever sort of hobby or activity like really helps you kind of stay grounded. I think finding space for being grounded and being focused is a really important way to deal with daily triggers.
Awesome. Great advice for anybody. I appreciate that. Very well-rounded answer too. I'm impressed. Debbie is saying, thank you very much. That helps a lot.
You're welcome, Debbie.
Punflower asks, do you have a favorite mental health app?
In some ways,
are you allowed to choose them? Is it like your
I
children?
am allowed to choose.
Okay.
I do have favorites, but I was going to say it's a little bit like kids, is that, even though you have a favorite, you appreciate them all for sort of different...
Sure, for what they bring, sure.
Right, exactly right. So I really like an app called Super Better. It's an app that kind of gamifies overcoming challenges. And so I think that it's really nice in that it breaks down, you kind of specify an epic win, which is the thing you're kind of striving for. You enlist allies and you encounter sort of bad guys, which are kind of setbacks to those challenges. So I think Super Better is a nice app, especially if you have kind of like a task you're working towards. I really do like these different mood tracking apps. I think Dailyo is one you mentioned, I think is kind of cool. Mood Notes is another one I've used recently that I think is cool. We've been doing a research study here at UC Irvine where we've been evaluating different mood tracking apps. And so we downloaded 61 of them.
Oh my God.
And have gone through all of the different features and looked at them. And so, again, when you look at 61, like there's some you like for different reasons.
Sure.
So we have kind of sets of different mood tracking apps. For some of the cognitive behavioral therapy apps, I like Joyable and I like Pacifica because these are things that have some scientific evidence behind them and have a sort of good user experience. Now, these are apps that do require some paid subscription for their additional features, which I think is a challenge. Pacifica has maybe a little bit more free features available there. Calm and Headspace are ones we always talk about.
Right.
There's a variety of different things we have on CyberGuide, and I will say, if people follow us on CyberGuide social media, so you can follow us at Twitter at CyberGuide, usually we'll create around different months what we call kind of app toolkits that kind of focus on different apps that might have skills that kind of focus on different things that are going on that month. So
Okay.
we try to kind of mix it up in terms of kind of focusing on like, here's some apps that might help with these specific sort of issues too. So again, those are apps that I really like, but those are probably based on my interests and my preferences. I like superheroes, so I like Super Better. If you don't like superheroes, it's probably maybe not the best app for you. I talked to my mom about it sometime, and I had her read like one of the books that it was based on, talks about it, and she's like, "This is boring. It's all about superheroes." I was like, "I know, Mom. That's the point."
That's why it's awesome, Mom.
I know. But you also don't like the Avengers, but everyone else does. Come on. So.
Well, you're in the right audience for superheroes for sure, so that's not gonna be missed. But I do get that. I mean, but it sounds like there's a boatload of them out there. So if you don't like Super Better, you'll find something that's right. That works.
Well, I think that's one thing. I mean, people often ask me like, what are my concerns around mental health apps? And I think a lot of professionals' concerns is that people are going to use that. There's bad stuff out there. It's going to harm people. And I think that probably the majority of these things, even if they're ineffective, are probably not harmful. But I do worry that someone might download an app, give it a try. It doesn't really help them much, and they'll think like, well, I really tried and it didn't work for me, and that means like I'm a failure and I'll never get better. And I think really in this app space, because I said there's not an app that's going to work for everyone, it might take some trial or error and downloading some different things and trying them out. There's actually, I will do a little bit, this is my disclaimer, I don't have an interest in I don't have a financial interest in any apps, but there are some apps that I've been involved in the development of in academic settings, which is why I don't have a financial interest in them. And so one of these sets of apps is an app set that we called IntelliCare, and that's available both on Google Play and Apple iTunes. And the way we developed IntelliCare is that it was a set of different like mini applications. So each app had sort of a different purpose. So there was a sleep hygiene app, and there was a goal setting app, and there was a thought challenging app, and there was a coping skills app. And when you downloaded the IntelliCare system, it would kind of point you to different apps that you would use. And that kind of overcame this idea that like, there's one app that's going to help everybody. Instead of like, oh, well, here's 13 apps we developed, and maybe one or two of these things are going to be helpful for you. And so my biggest worry about sort of the digital mental health space is that someone will try something, not get better, think it doesn't work, and don't sort of seek an additional service that might help them.
Well, I mean, and bringing that back to what you said before is that it kind of works the same way in the real world when you're talking face to face. I've seen people go to a counselor and then either it not be cost effective, so they stop, which I imagine is sometimes the reason you stop an app. But sometimes you meet a counselor, they're not right for you, and then you're like, well, that's it. Again, you have that same mentality, like, oh, that was something's wrong with me. I'm not fixable. I'm, all those things that come up when somebody feels like they didn't hit the right, when they don't find the right thing right away. I mean, potentially can be turned away from anything by anything happening to them.
Yep.
So.
Yep, I think that's right. And I think that in the counselor space, the sad thing is that it takes a lot of resources to find a counselor.
Yes.
Set that appointment. At least in the app space, it's like, well, you can switch apps like go back to the app store and download another one. Right. There's not as many barriers there. I mean, I do think it's a little bit hard sometimes to figure out like, is this like, have I just not used this app enough yet to see if it's going to help me, or is it time to sort of abort and sort of switch gears? And so I think that's something that usually I tell people, if you're going to use an app and try to figure it out, like try to stick with it for like 2 weeks or so and see if it seems to be helping you. And if you've done that kind of, you've given it the good try, and it doesn't work, like maybe that's the right time to kind of swap over and try something else. So to actually like give it a chance to do its work. But, again, in the app space, it's a little bit just easier to say, bye-bye app, I'm not going to use you anymore. Like, we're no longer friends, and switch to a new app, as opposed to in the counselor space. I think that's harder, even if you're working with a counselor who's maybe not, not helping you actually.
Yeah, I mean, but if I find somebody who doesn't have the like proper health insurance coverage alone,
Mhm.
it will take, like, I know people that I have helped like go through their insurance and helped find a counselor, and I know once they like don't find that first person, in my experience, it might take them like another month at least before they
Yeah.
go and look again. So I do like that aspect of at least there's an app, maybe not this one but another one. And again, if we can kind of serve these apps as gateways to maybe traditional therapy,
Mhm.
or again, because for in some cases I understand it will be your end all, like this is apps either help you, or there's not like you said, there's not a therapist for miles around you, so too
Right.
bad. Or it helps you kind of comprehend that, like, hey, this is okay, and you move into seeing somebody in person maybe.
Yeah, and I think that in some ways these apps can be a good sort of introduction so that you can sort of try to learn some of the concepts before you get into therapy. Like these cognitive behavioral therapy apps,
Sure,
for
sure.
example,
Mm-hmm.
can kind of teach you the bread and butter of cognitive behavioral therapy, and then the therapist can help you do the more advanced levels. So you're jumping in with a sort of a higher level of understanding. And I think that that could be really valuable for people who are trying to figure out if this is the right thing for me. Um, I'm biased, of course, towards cognitive behavioral therapy because that's
Sure,
one of the treatments I'm
sure.
trained in. But I also have that bias because we know from research studies that it actually does work very well for a variety of different things. And there are a variety of different cognitive behavioral therapy apps out there, things like Pacifica and Joyable that I mentioned, that could teach sort of the beginning skills for people who might follow up with a course of therapy.
Yeah. Sunflower Geek asks, which apps do you recommend specifically for depression? Again, I'm gonna go and just like throw the dice here and assume you're gonna talk about apps that are focused in CBT. Yes, no, maybe.
Yeah, so I mean, first thing I will say that on CyberGuide, we do have a sort of search and filter feature. So if
Ah, there
people
you
are looking
go.
for apps for specific areas, you
Here are
can
the links,
search
guys.
either by the target conditions. So click on things like depression, and you can also search for things like uh, strategies. So if you want like a mindfulness app, you can search by mindfulness. If you want a
Mm,
cognitive behavioral therapy based app, you can search on that. As I mentioned earlier, I think apps like Pacifica and um, MoodKit is another one that uses cognitive behavioral therapy strategies. Joyable is one that uses cognitive behavioral therapy, but again, it is a paid app, so it has a
mm-hmm,
cost associated with it.
mm-hmm.
I think that apps like Headspace do have cognitive behavioral therapy type skills built into that app. So there's like breathing exercises,
Sure.
progressive muscle
Yep.
relaxation, which are skills of cognitive behavioral therapy. Um, the IntelliCare apps, like I said, that I worked on the development of, some of them are based off of cognitive behavioral therapy principles. So those are some of the apps that I would suggest that have cognitive behavioral therapy built in. But also, you can also go to Cyberguide and just filter by cognitive behavioral therapy and look at the different apps that are available on is listed on the website.
Uh, I think that's yeah, I think that's amazing. So you guys, the work has already been done for you. You just gotta like do that last little bit and like look at the reviews then, basically. That's like the last piece. Does anybody have any other questions before we let Dr. Schueller run away? Do you have any closing remarks? Anything that you like want to make sure you touch upon?
I think we really hit a lot of the points that are usually like my talking points. There's not an app for everybody. There's some good ones out there. There's some ones we still have to learn about, and there's a lot of bad things out there. Uh, Apps are not replacement for people, and I mean that not just to mean professionals. I also mean that to mean friends and family and other sort of support members, communities like this. There's some apps that have that community social feature, but there's a lot of apps that provide sort of different needs and different supports. But really, I think if this is something that you're interested in, and by that I mean like trying to find a technology that's going to help. It might be sort of a group of different apps that can be like one of these app toolkits that we can think about as like a self-care toolkit. Yeah.
Got it. Cool. By the way, I wanted to let you know, I don't know if you did this on purpose, but your Pikachu is a huge hit with chat, and definitely the right crowd to. Are you a gamer?
I game a little bit. I do not game as I used to. My brother was very nice and he tweeted out an announcement for this
Yeah.
stream for me, and he described me as an avid gamer. And I texted him back and I said, avid, like maybe back in the day when before I had kids and a job, I was an avid
Sure.
gamer. But definitely, I played a lot of Pokemon growing up. I will say most of my time in games spent nowadays are either in Magic Arena or in playing Magic
Got it.
uh, Paper with my brother. But I love the Pokemon. I cannot wait till my kids get older so they're able to play. And this Pikachu uh, has been adorning my office probably for the past 15 years,
Oh.
including all my different moves. One of my friends in grad school bought it for me for my office
Aw.
there. It's always been a place. And I used to have it, well, in my old office, it was right behind me. And then when I moved to Irvine, I had it like up on my bookshelf. And one of my old students, I was on a video chat with her and she was like, I really missed the Pikachu in the background. I was like, that was not intentional, but I can change that if you'd like.
Aw, that's amazing. So the Pikachu is like a staple of
Yep.
of your face, of your being.
That's
really
exactly
neat.
right. Of my video chatting being. So
I love that. I love that so much. Awesome. All right, everybody. If there are no further questions, I'm super excited to thank Dr. Schueller for being on. And yeah, I appreciate your work. I appreciate CyberGuide. Keep on doing you. I'm super excited I got to connect to you guys, as well as connect you guys to take this. I think it's awesome. I thank you. Thank you, everybody who's been here. Please stick around. There is more show to be had just in a few moments. And don't forget to be the light. See you soon, guys.
thanks.